parents, the child goes to the teacher who will guide that child.
What do you mean by external moral authority? You use that expression a lot.
Materialism has to do with when you are
Hello, a very warm welcome back to you in this course entitled The Course in Values and Spirituality. I do hope that you have been following all the previous episodes. If you haven't, I highly recommend that you watch this entire series in a chronological order, as we are going through the series of 8 textbooks that Sister Denise had written for educational purposes. Currently, we are looking at the subject of educationalists address the issue. We may also touch on the subject of extended cooperation in this episode. I'd like to welcome Sister Denise back to the studio.
Thank you.
The question that you start off with in this segment is something that I think every single school principal, head of an educational institution, every parent thought of in his or her day. What are the values that we should be passing on to the next generation? That is the $1,000,000 question, million rupee question, £1,000,000 question. How did you arrive at an answer for this?
Well, there's a phenomenon that needs to be borne in mind here, and that is the generation before the current one. The father and the mother were both earning, and the children tended to get raised by the TV.
That is so funny. The children were raised by the television.
Well, that's the thing. You put the child in front of the television because the television will keep the child quiet, and then the child will pick up all sorts of things. But what happened when the parents are off, both of them earning, and the children had much less connection with the parents and much more connection with each other. And what you also have in the previous generation is a great deal of dysfunctional family issues which were coming up to be addressed. And then children of broken families, you had a much higher divorce rate, domestic violence, all of these things pushed the children back onto their own resources. So it created a space where whatever the parents' values were, they weren't able to pass it on to the next generation because the next generation is creating its own values. And you see many instances of siblings who look after each other, and they sort of make the parents redundant. And this gap between the generations has resulted in a population of young people who are figuring things out for themselves and are not interested in something that has been passed on, a heritage or a legacy. It's like there's a big break between the 20th century and the 21st. And people born in the 21st century, we call them the millennials. They're a different type of people.
A different how?
They think differently. They're not operating according to the stereotyping that was assumed by the people of the late 20th century. They just seem to be influenced by different things. They look at things differently. They feel differently about themselves, and they tend to be much more self-reliant. And so it means that I think they are catalysts for big change, and that there is this sort of big stop that's happening to what's been passed on, and the young generation is saying no.
You end of this paragraph with the following words: they, meaning the educationalists, are not sure if our pluralistic society can adopt a consensual set of values. They agree on teaching the next generation to be moral, but question what that means, as well as which values to teach and how best to teach them. That is one highly strange conundrum.
Well, it is, because you see what's happening is they might well want to raise the next generation, but the next generation is saying, we don't need you, and we'll create our own values. Thank you very much.
Oof.
You know, so that's what I'm saying. There's this kind of break happening in the human population. You know, one of the aspects of climate change is that the young people are very aware that the generation before them has given as a legacy a denuded, depleted planet. So they don't feel they owe anything to the generation before. And many feel like, okay, this is it, it's us, we have to deal with it. And it's causing people to be very innovative and inventive and come up with something that the previous generation just doesn't know what they're talking about. You know, they have different music, different clothing, different sense of, you know, the difference between male and female is very different now. People are more, in a sense, more fraternal. They're quite egalitarian, and they're very, very keen to create their own world, their own way. And of course, it's creating multiple value systems which have to coexist. One of the things you have is a very multiracial society, multiracial, multi-religious, and many people are really wanting to get to these core values through their own conversations with each other and so on. And they're just unwilling to fall into the categories that the previous century had as a matter of course. So the older generation really doesn't understand the new generation in many ways. And the new generation is saying, well, that doesn't matter because we're it and you people are going anyway.
The next section is entitled Extended Cooperation. You start off with the following words: the task of education and values should not fall on the shoulders of teachers alone. Values education has to be integrated into other areas so that everyone can realize their responsibility to model values and morals. I think a number of teachers listening to this will be very relieved to hear the first line, because I've heard of a number of situations where a child behaves badly at school, and the teachers would say, but when the child got here, the child was in that condition, and the parents will say, but it's your job to teach my child manners. And I've heard of situations where there's been a clash between the parents and the teachers in this regard. So this would does open some doors, and also places the responsibility at the door of more than one individual.
Well, of course, and society had kind of created a very artificial position for the teachers where any problems there are, they have to fix, and they're not equipped for it.
No.
So that's very unfair. And what we're also seeing is the legacy of the end of the 20th century is a highly dysfunctional world.
Yes, that cannot be ignored, can it?
No. And who is responsible? Well, everybody's responsible on some level or another. What you have in the 21st century is massive amount of war. The young people are seeing that the older generation is wrecking the planet, wrecking the society. And, you know, there are a lot of young people who do not think there is a future. It's as if the young people are on a cusp between a civilization that has collapsed and something new that hasn't yet got born. And so some of the young people find it extremely scary, and they become very unstable because of it. But then there are others who find it so stimulating that it's really bringing up their creativity, and they are sort of inventing new ways of being, new kind of leadership and so on. And you get people who are very young and yet they have a very mature worldview. They seem to be able to move into leadership positions very well, and I am very optimistic about this, because all of the things that the 20th century thought they should do, I mean, basically didn't work. And so the young people are just coming up with their own thing, which much of which is really very, very good. So so it's a break, and people of the older generation really can and need to just reinvent themselves, reinvent how everything has been, because the older generation has something of value to share with the young generation, and part of it has to be their ability to endure, their resilience, their you know, that you have to have some people who are bridges between the old and the new, because it can't just stop like that with a big chasm that people have to jump over. So if there are people from the older generation who can form that bridge and who can understand the new generation, but who can also bring with themselves valuable wisdom from former times, that is really very helpful.
You mention a number of role players in the next sentence, and imply that if all of them come together, then something great can be achieved. I need to read that sentence fully so that the viewer knows what I'm talking about. Close cooperation is required between the education sector and those that also have an important role in this process, including the family, media, and by that you mean TV, radio, electronic, and the press, the employment sector, and non-governmental organizations. Once all these parties get together, what is it that you hope they will achieve?
Quite frankly, I think that they have minimal impact. At the time of writing, most people were thinking these instruments, these organizations have an important role to play. But what we've seen in the last couple of decades is that a lot of NGOs have failed, a lot of UN programs have failed. Media is interested in its own financial aggrandizement, and the family is falling apart. And so the young people, the millennials, are saying, well, we create our own electronic newspapers. We can use YouTube, Facebook, social media. We will do all of this for ourselves, and we will not come under the influence of a top-down attempt to influence our thinking, but we will think for ourselves. So that being the case, I think the function of a course like this is to really help the young people to think clearly, to develop critical thinking, so that all of their natural creativity can be channeled in a way that's really positive. I see an important role for people who are coming from the traditional media, family, NGOs and so on, but they have to really work with the new ideas and new desires that are coming up in the young people, and you cannot just impose your assumptions on the next generation, because the next generation is going to say, this is redundant, this is obsolete, we're not interested. We have to work together to create together something which is really positive and nurturing and corresponds to what is needed in this emerging world, which is very, very different to the world of the previous generation.
You continue in the same vein in the book, and the line that has caught my interest is you refer to the media and its influence on people's lives, but you also ended with the words, and could encourage people to improve their moral health. Is this still your stance, or has this changed?
What we've seen is that the hope that the media and so on can be proactive in the moral health of the young people, well, they failed to do that. They rather try to target the young generation as the next set of consumers, and they're trying to use the systems of advertising to get the young people to empty their pockets or their parents' pockets. So I think what's happening now is young people maybe coming together with very innovative people from the previous generation who are maybe not orthodox members of the previous generation, and they're working on something very new. So I think that these organizations have shown themselves not to be socially responsible in the way that they were expected to be. And so the new generation is looking after itself in that area too.
So would you say then that looking after one's moral health then has to be the responsibility of the young person themselves, rather than to hand this responsibility over to outside influences?
I don't think we can put it in that way either. A young person is saying, I'm not giving my power away. I am going to really look after myself. I'm on my own here. I'm in a relatively hostile environment. You know, so a lot of people are living in survival, and so that is quite toxic from the point of view of culture.
What does being in survival mode do to the young person's psyche?
Survival is a big concern, but they don't want to have they don't want to be just in survival, but the morality means the opinion of the elite patriarchal group as to what is the right way to do things. And what the young people are seeing is it didn't work out, and so they're not buying it. So they're having to create an entirely new morality. And I think what that means is the young people are very interested in core spirituality. They don't want to adopt something that they think has failed. So they want to go back to the drawing board and work with essential core values, core spiritual qualities, and create a morality from there, a new morality. And I think that's quite positive.
The next aspect is as follows. The business sector, alarmed by burgeoning corruption among employees, has launched a variety of publications and courses in business ethics. Not many people know this. I want to finish that paragraph because I want your take on the entire thing. Corporations are developing their own code of ethics, and because the law is so ignored, are having to enforce their own policies regarding legal and moral violations such as blackmail, bribery, embezzlement, forgery, fraud, tax evasion, sexual harassment, and theft. So this is kind of like an entirely new ecosystem.
You know, one of the things that is emerging is that corruption and fraud, sexual harassment, embezzlement, bribery is occurring at the highest level. And so when it's occurring at the highest level, the people in the lower levels are not going to be impressed by any moral systems that are being sent down by those at the highest level, because they know that they're not walking their talk. So this is what I'm saying. On the one hand, you're getting very, very innovative people who are motivated by high ideals and very much also motivated by looking after themselves. So this is one of the aspects of survival. You look after yourself first. Another thing that's happening, which is more on the negative side, is that people are moving into what I call right-wing fanatical groupings. You have people who, in the state of being in survival, they will turn inwards, they will develop hatred for anyone who is not like them, and so you're getting a situation that's very hostile, very antagonistic between different groups. So you have a lot of religious fanaticism, political fanaticism, vigilante groups, all of this kind of thing. So, you know, there's one strand of energy that's very, very positive, but there's another strand which is a reaction to this state of survival that people are in, where they're just really, really antagonistic to anyone who's not like us. So neo-Nazi, fascist, all this kind of thing is happening to an alarming degree. So people are really divided against each other. And this is another energy that's going on. Both the energies are going on. You know, and the world today is a world that is substantially less stable than it was 20 years ago. So some people are responding to it in a very optimistic, very positive, very creative way, and then others are, you know, responding in a very negative way. And so there's a lot of polarization happening, which is a very difficult situation educationally. There isn't that openness and freedom.
You end off this section by speaking of the numerous foundations and organizations that are trying to bring moral awareness to both the educated and the uneducated. And your last sentence is, collaboration between these organizations and with the educational sector can be an effective force in stemming moral decline and in strengthening character across all religious, ethnic, and social boundaries. Given what you said about your change of heart in respect of the previous paragraph, is this still your view?
Well, as I said before, there are these two strands. On the one hand, there are people who are becoming really rigid, polarized in a negative way, development of a hating attitude towards anyone who's not them. And then on the other hand, there are people who are really wanting to work with the difficult situations. I mean, in Europe, for example, there are more refugees moving around Europe than there were at the end of the Second World War. And that happened very rapidly. There's a lot of human trafficking going on. There's a great deal of militarization and a lot of mercenaries. There are gangs, you know. So on one side you've got a really dark energy going on because it's such a hostile environment, and on the other hand you've got people being very positive, very philanthropic, very generous, very beautiful. And it's a bit of a clash between those two, and a polarizing between those two. So I think, yes, NGOs are doing what they can. I think people are losing faith in the integrity of charitable foundations, community organizations, NGOs.
Why?
Because there's so many scandals coming out about them, and because so many NGOs were used as fronts for something else, a little darker. And what I'm seeing is just the face of the society is just really rapidly changing, and there's a great deal of uncertainty. A lot of people just don't know what to do. And then on the other hand, you've got some who are really positively picking up the gauntlet and saying, this is the way to go.
I'd like to say goodbye to you, and also hope that you join us for the next episode, which will be taking the subject of values in education further. Thank you so much, Sister Denise.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. We'll see you soon for the next episode. Goodbye.